We are on to the next round. Let's talk NFL playoffs. We'll break down all 4 games. Just kind of one maybe nerdy fact that I've sifted through all of the stuff, and also the picks coming off a 5-1 week last week. People know this about me. They've said it since I was a kid. I probably shouldn't say it now and jinx myself, but they're like, come playoff time, the Russillo kid steps up. Okay. Dallas, 3.5-point favorites last year against San Francisco. They lost to the Niners. Going into that Tampa matchup, there was one consistent thing I kept coming back to. And again, you can find some statistical matchup, something you think that actually is super important, and then it ends up not being a factor whatsoever. But I thought that Tampa's O-line issues, even with Ryan Jensen back, and the fact that Dallas has the pass rush that they have, that was a very clear advantage. And Tampa was probably the most one-dimensional football team of any teams that were entering the playoffs. Like, seriously, when you think about, like, hey, when I think about Tampa, now granted, they're getting some of their guys back healthy. It didn't matter. It wasn't a close football game. Having said all of those things, it's weird how the wild card round kind of leads to the maybe outsized momentum for a bunch of different teams, and usually quarterbacks as well. It's happening with Daniel Jones. We'll get to that. But it'll be a team where you go, wait, you've doubted and hated on the Cowboys for weeks, and they beat a Tampa team that, as we said, is very limited and super predictable. And now it's like, look out, Cowboys all of a sudden. I know it's Brock Purdy, but I just can't see it right now. So you're already going to be able to tell where my lean is. Against Tampa, Dallas ran 64 snaps of 2 deep safety. Why? Because they knew Tampa wasn't going to run. They couldn't run. They hadn't been running for months. They were just going to drop back and pass the entire time. I can't imagine how easy the prep was for Dallas's defense going into this. And by the way, shout out to the Athletics' Ted Nguyen, who's joined us before on the podcast, providing us with that number. So I'm not smart enough to tell you, hey, this is what they're going to do. They're going to do more of a cover 3, and they're going to do all these different things against San Francisco. It's just that San Francisco is a completely different challenge because of their balance, because of their blocking, and some of the stuff that they're doing now with Christian McCaffrey, who when he was traded, I got to admit, I don't value running backs, especially expensive ones, especially ones with injury histories, but it's going to feel a bit like the Anthony Davis trade here, which isn't the best comparison because I can understand all the arguments against it. I don't know what McCaffrey means long-term, but right now in the short term, he's a matchup nightmare again. He's a serious problem. He's 11 touchdowns since he's been with San Francisco. And you can see that there's a concern factor with him that doesn't necessarily translate just to his raw stats, how many carries, how many receptions. Some weeks he's an attack in the passing game. Some weeks it's the other way around. The top leading rushers in the Seattle game were McCaffrey, then it was Debo and Brock Purdy. So production at the running back position after McCaffrey at that position is somewhat of a concern, but it isn't here because I just like San Francisco minus 3.5 in this one. Because it's just a completely different challenge than what Dallas has. All right, the second game here, Philadelphia and the New York Giants. Philly, if we were going to take temperatures of momentum that I was touching on in the beginning there, kind of the Daniel Jones may have the hottest temperature right now. Philadelphia is far too low. Maybe we're assuming too much. I know maybe it was the Hurts injury. Maybe it was just them not feeling like they were a factor because everything was sewn up early on with them. I don't know what it is, but I feel like we're not talking about Philly, and I kind of hate that phrase, so I'm calling myself out on it. But Philly should feel really good. Philly fans should feel really good. Going into this matchup against New York, they've beaten them 2 times, Week 14 and Week 18. Week 18, I don't really know what that means. Resting players 22-16, but let's go back to the 48-22 matchup. Hurts did, I guess they're arguing less designed runs for him. He did carry it 9 times for 13 yards, but there's a difference between full carries and designed runs on that one. So he wasn't super productive. Does that mean there's something there with the Giants? I don't know. Let's keep digging it through this. I do think he ran more in the first half of the season. When you look at what the Giants have now, the defensive line, Dexter Lawrence, we touched on him with Willie Colon, and all you had to do was watch that Vikings game being like, this guy's serious. If you look at nose tackles lining up, all right, quarterback hits 4 nose tackles. Dexter Lawrence is getting a QB hit on 5.3% of his snaps at nose tackle. That is double the national average. I guess we would call it the National Football League average at 2.6. But the Eagles' O-line is arguably the best in football. Week 14, the Giants blitzed 53% of the Eagles' designed dropbacks. So now you're thinking, wait, does this mean that that's something to look at Week 14 and they're going to go ahead and blitz Hurts on some of this stuff? Hurts, I thought, was good, but you could look at some of the limitations on the actual yardage per some of those plays against the blitzes where it would maybe work in the Giants' favor. I think the biggest thing with the Giants is, at least on the defensive side of the things, is Ojulari didn't practice on Wednesday. By the time this posts, that could change. You could argue the Giants feel better about their four-man rush, so they're not going to have to blitz as many times. My guess would be that the Giants, depending on what kind of personnel they have in a four-down lineman allotment, or I should say alignment, are they going to just hope, hey, can we get pressure with this group? Because if we aren't, then we're going to have to start blitzing again. Now, when you start looking at some of this blitz stuff and feeling like, okay, this will be what they do in the playoff game because it's what they did in the regular season, there's plenty of times where that's completely misleading. I will never forget my favorite example of all time when the Patriots won their first Super Bowl. They played the Rams at home. They blitzed Kurt Warner literally every single time. After the game, there was a quote saying, I got blitzed as soon as I got off the bus. They match up in the Super Bowl. The game plan was very, very different. So that also is how it worked in the Giants against the Vikings. They lose to the Vikings in a last-second field goal in the regular season. They blitzed Minnesota a ton in that game, but they only blitzed them on 15% of Kirk Cousins' dropbacks during the playoff game. Maybe because after playing them, they realized this team really can't run the football all that much. So those are just some of the numbers to look at. I think the most important thing is, despite the Eagles giving up 9.2 yards per rush on QB designed rushes, which is third worst in the NFL, Jones only had 8 yards and 2 scrambles in week 14. I think the real thing here is that Jones just played the Vikings, who are 26th against the pass. The Eagles are 6th against the pass. The pick here is still the Giants plus 7.5. Week 10, Kansas City beat Jacksonville in KC. Kansas City now an 8.5-point favorite in this one. In that game, it was 27-10. Mahomes threw a pick with 8 minutes left. So going back and thinking about how I felt when I was watching that game, I didn't really feel like Jacksonville had much of a chance. There is this Jacksonville part of the momentum rush here with the comeback against the Chargers, where it's either the Jacksonville Jaguars found out something about themselves, right? If they were to be competitive with Kansas City, maybe even win and pull off the upset, you'd think Jacksonville found out. They learned about themselves that day in those final 30 minutes. Or if Kansas City wins this game as I expected they would, and I'm going to get to one specific pass number here, then we'll go, you know what? Maybe we learned that the Chargers and Jags just aren't on that level. And I'm going with that. That's kind of what I'm going with here. Jacksonville's 8th in pass rush win rate. I can't wait to watch Walker again up close in this one after talking a little bit about his disappearing act against the Chargers. Maybe the film tells you something different. Maybe he graded out a lot better. You never know. It's just dudes on the couch. But the number one pass block win rate team, that is your Kansas City Chiefs. So we'll find out. I'm going to lay the 8.5, even though in their last 9 games, Kansas City is 1-7-1 against the spread. The headliner, Cincinnati at Buffalo. This opened at Buffalo minus 3.5 on FanDuel right now. Bills minus 5.5. This is an O-line, D-line thing. We know that Jamal Williams, tackle, didn't practice on Wednesday, and Alex Cappa is also out on Wednesday. Apparently, they both needed assistance still walking around on Sunday. I don't know about this one with the O-line. Major, major concerns. I almost feel like the Baltimore game was kind of a fluky game. And I guess I'm saying the same thing about Miami. I would expect, because both were scary against far inferior opponents and with second and third string quarterbacks, that we could get a really clean game here where it's like, man, look at this group at the top of the AFC. But this number is alarming. With Von Miller, the Bills ranked 4th in NFL pressure rate with 4 or less pass rushers. Remember that opening week game against the Rams, which is totally fool's gold because it's not the way this sport works. People get hurt. You become 2 or 3 different teams over the course of a season, maybe even more. Chris Long has told us about how, there were certain times, I think it was the Patriots. Well, I know it was the Patriots, but I don't know the exact date, but it was almost kind of like after Halloween, you start to figure out who you are. And that's kind of one of their mantras that was inside of the building. I think somebody else said after Thanksgiving. I don't know. That would feel a little late to be like, hey, you guys want to start playing some football after 10 weeks? So watching what Buffalo was capable of with Von Miller and how dominant they were just with 4 guys, which I think is the goal for any defensive team, for any general manager putting together rosters. Like, is there any way we can build a D-line where we can get pressure with 4? Because if we can do that, we can do a lot of other things. If we can't ever get pressure with 4, then we're fighting with at a deficit every single week. And that's the problem now with the Bills, because without Von Miller, still 4 or less rushers, they are 27th in pressure rate. So the thing that they were really good at, we already knew this because Von Miller hasn't been there for a while, but the thing that they were really good at, they're not as good at anymore. But the thing that Cincinnati has always had problems with, they're probably going to even have more problems considering their own offensive line combination issues. I think they were up to 15 at one point. I think that was the graphic that I saw at one point. Hurst is better at tight end, but so is the Bills secondary. I think that group has started to come together. Tre'Davious White has been better. So there's another part of this Bills equation here where I feel like I'm being a little dismissive of their turnover issues. Maybe it's just as simple as me sitting here saying they may be due to be clean. But I went through the 8-game winning stretch. This Bills team has won 8 in a row. And when you look at their losses, they're like, they could have won every one of these games. I guess that's why deep down I still have so much faith in this Bills team. Their turnover run during this 8-game win streak, they're even. They're even. They're plus minus, their turnover differential is 0. I went through them all. They've won the turnover battle 3 times. They've lost it 4 times, and there was 1 push. 3 and 4 in the turnover battle while you have an 8-game winning streak. So maybe it's just because I like Josh Allen so much now that I'm like, yeah, they probably turn it over a couple times and still win this game. And that's what we saw against Miami, because I think 1 pick was on him. 1 definitely wasn't. It was a Beasley tip ball, and the fumble was completely on him to give up the lead. And now you're like, what the hell is going on with this team? So the Bills are the pick, minus 5.5. So to review, I'll lay the points with San Francisco. I will take the points with the Giants. I'll lay the points with Kansas City, despite their dreadful against the spread number. And I'll lay the points with Buffalo. One quick last addition to this. QB pressure rankings in order. Allen, the most pressure. Dak, because of Dallas. Mahomes, 3rd. Burrow, 4th. Hurts, 5th. Lawrence, Jones, and Purdy. Best win would be New York at Philadelphia. It doesn't always work out this way, but the worst loss, I think, would be Philly against New York. Enjoy the playoffs. For the latest odds, check out FanDuelSportsbook.com.